Great. Okay. So it's my great pleasure to introduce Pihla Siim, who is a research fellow at the Migration Institute of Finland. She's got a PhD in folklore studies. We were talking about her background and how she's come into this the other day. But she also has a long-term affiliation to the University of Tartu in Estonia. Her PhD is from the University of Eastern Finland, and she's currently working at the Migration Institute of Finland. So part of life in Finland and part in Estonia. So quite a transnational life, as well as studying people with transnational and translocal families in the Estonian Finnish context. So she's particularly interested in narrative research, in children's experience of mobility, translocal families, and her recent publications have looked at doing family through practices of silence, storycraft method, intergenerational care, and family mobilities. And Pihla is currently working on mixed immigration status families and the impact of deportability on families and intimate relations. She's been working on translocal families in various different projects at the University of Eastern Finland and transborder commuters and returning migrants in Estonia in an Estonian Research Council funded project. And that's led to 2 edited volumes, Translocal Childhood and Family Mobility in East and North Europe, and Migration and Families in East and Northern Europe. But at the moment, Pihla is working on a project called Indify, which is on the intimate geographies of bordering, deportability and its effects on Finnish citizens with foreign spouses and their extended families. And that's a 4-year project running until next year, funded by the Research Council of Finland. Pihla is here for about a week still as a visiting researcher, and a lot of her work has really interesting overlaps with people here in Bristol. So in our Brexit Couples project, we're also working on mixed status families. We've got Natasha Carver, who will hopefully join us later, is working on issues of genuineness. I'm particularly interested in, I read a piece of Pihla's the other day that was talking about how migrants use contrasts with other groups of migrants to negotiate local belonging and deservingness, which has resonances for some work that John Fox done and some things that we're grappling with at the moment. So I'm sure there'll be lots of interesting conversations to be had. Today, Pihla is going to talk about some work from the Indify project with this talk on mixed citizenship couples navigating understandings of genuine relationships and the burden of proof. So I'll hand over. And let's take it away.
Okay. Hello, everybody, and thank you for coming. Yes, my earlier work has been mostly on transnational families, but this setting is new for me. It's mixed citizenship couples. Okay, so Kathleen already mentioned the project I'm working for. It's this intimate geographies of bordering, and I would also like to introduce other members of the project. It's led by Saara Pellander, who is also the director of the Migration Institute of Finland. And other researchers in this project are Evelina Lyytinen. She has a background in geography, and she has actually now finished her working period for the project. But Jana Palander just started. She's a public law scholar. And now we also have a research assistant, Mimosa Suontama, who started in the project, and she's also doing her MA thesis, which is related to the topic. And I also want to thank her for her work with the statistical data from the Finnish Immigration Service. So we focus on the couples, where one is of Finnish nationality and the other one is a foreigner with somehow insecure status in Finland. But by defining what kind of intimate partnerships are acceptable, this border regime also influences citizens who are in a relationship with a foreigner. And what I'm presenting here today is based on interviews with mixed citizenship couples and their relatives. But since it has been really challenging to reach these couples, I have also started doing expert interviews with people who work or counsel these kind of couples. And then we recently received material from the Finnish Immigration Service, and I have had the possibility to take a quick look at this material as well. These final negative decisions for the spouses of Finnish citizens and these decisions were made in 2023. And we are also about to receive the decisions that were first negative, but changed after the appeal or in administrative court. First, there was kind of misunderstanding and we didn't receive the material we asked for. I think those are going to be especially interesting because there's kind of this negotiation of whether it is acceptable or not. And I also listed the interviews here in detail. What I wanted to say here is that the Finnish citizens in all the couples were women, and their spouses were from Middle East, East Asia, or Latin America. And they were all relatively young, in their 20s or 30s. And as a starting point, I would like to tell that most of the spouses of Finnish citizens applying for residence permit as a family member did receive a positive decision. But the proportion of negative decision has varied quite a lot, from 17.8 to 2.8 during the last 5 years. And the reasons for negative residence permit decision for spouses during the last 12 years were sham marriage, evasion of provisions on entry. Then there was this statement that they were not family members, meaning that their marriage wasn't valid for some reason. Or they did not respond to the clarification request, or general conditions were not met. This could mean, for example, that they had divorced already, the applicant or the spouse had died, or something like that, or they were endangering public order and security. And this is from the page of the Finnish Immigration Service, showing the negative decisions, actually all decisions made in 2023. And as you can see, last year there were altogether 2,747 decisions, and negative decisions there were 76. And if you look at the colors from the previous years, you can see more of these red ones, which are negative decisions. And this shows citizenship of the spouse. Most decisions were made from citizens from Russian Federation, Iraq, Thailand, United States, Turkey, Somalia, Morocco, Afghanistan, Philippines, Gambia. And the next one on the list were Vietnam and UK. And here it's also interesting to see that this phenomena is very gendered in relation to the country of origin of the spouse. The applicants coming from Russian Federation, for example, they are usually married to Finnish men. And Iraq and Turkey, they are married to Finnish women. But regarding the data we have from the Finnish Immigration Service, it's actually difficult to say. They don't point out the gender of the applicants. You can sometimes read it from the applications, and sometimes it's quite difficult to figure out which kind of couples they are. So I'm not analyzing it here. But this, I wanted to mention that if we look at the gender of the applicants, it's possible to see that the male applicants get rejected more often than female applicants. These are numbers from the last year, but the proportion has been about the same over the years. So I'm looking at this process from experiential perspective of the applicant and the family reunifier, often called sponsor in the documents. But what is different in Finland is that actually there is no income requirement for this family reunification if one of the couple is a Finnish citizen. But there is this obligation to prove, to show that this is like a real relationship. And this can be difficult for people coming from different backgrounds because they are not used to provide all kinds of documents as maybe the Finnish citizens are used to. But from the perspective of Finnish citizens also, there is this question that why do I as a Finnish citizen have to put my own relationship up for others to evaluate? And of course, this is closely related to what Catherine and Helen Bray have written about experiential migrantization. And also Audrey Macklin, I cite her here. Having allied themselves with the foreigner, citizen spouses enter a liminal space where their legal status remains unaltered, but they are confronted with a harsher, meaner, and less accountable exercise of state power that is normally reserved for non-citizens. So here's a citation from one of the interviews with these experts, and she says, many Finns are completely baffled by this. They can't even begin to understand just how complicated these processes are. For many partners, it's their first leap into this whole Migre, or Finnish Immigration Service world. They are just like, what on earth is this? As if they don't have the right to choose their partner, or that they have the wrong kind of partner. Finns don't normally face this at all in their everyday life. No one questions our motives for choosing a partner. Sometimes it's money, looks, whatever, or love. But it's our own business what it is. Who we are with and who are we are and how we are together. But then Migri has this idea of a good relationship model that you are supposed to follow. So when we talk about transnational intimacies, it's evident that immigration control recognizes intimate ties rather selectively. And these mixed citizenship couples are usually viewed with wariness. So here I focus on expectations that are related to this genuine relationship and a right kind of family life. And it's important that people are planning to lead this family life in Finland. They make comparisons with ordinary family, and the couples are not supposed to deviate from this script. But it's maybe important to notice also that these couples face more restrictions. They are not so free to choose what kind of family life they want to live. For example, when I look at these documents, I see that multilocality and different care obligations can be seen as problematic. And I wanted to take also this one example of the UK Finnish family, where the applicant states that my family and I plan to move into the property on a certain date and hopefully live part of the year between the UK and Finland, but this depends on this visa application. If this visa application is unsuccessful, we will stay in the UK full time. My partner is doing her UK family ties visa, and both children have UK passports. We would like to spend time in Finland to keep close ties to the children's heritage, but understand that visas are complicated. So the application was rejected because they didn't answer some additional questions that were sent to them. But what I saw from the case that it was this that they didn't articulate very clearly their intentions to move to Finland, but they wanted to lead this kind of multi-local family life, which was seen as problematic from the perspective of officials. And also, they all the time ask whether the family is, whether they have a possibility to lead family life somewhere else than in Finland, and why they would like to live in Finland. And in this analyzed cases, among them there were some women who needed to take care of their elderly mothers abroad, which was also seen as problematic. This quotation was from one document where it was stated that the marriage has been consolidated following an improvement in the applicant's mother's health. So how they see the family, it also depends on the obligations towards other family members. So in a way, I see that they are kind of distancing from this ordinary life with all its unpredictability, which also comes out in the ways that this lane change is stigmatized. It's understood as circumventing immigration regulations. For example, in the case of one couple, it had been noted that the applicant is really leading actual family life with the sponsor, but as a negative factor, it had been pointed out that the applicant and their spouse began their family life at the time when the continuation of the applicant's stay in Finland was uncertain. So it's interesting here that the time frame can actually be very long. They are waiting for their decisions for years, but meantime they are not supposed to start family life or relationships. One could argue that these conceptualizations of marriage and family life become part of the bordering processes, and the couples are left with the burden of proof to show that they have right kind of relationships motivated by love. And officially, people who are making these decisions, they say that they are not evaluating whether this relationship is based on love, but you can actually read it from between the lines in many cases. So here are some questions that have been asked from many of the applicants. Have you lived together with your spouse? Where and when? Can you describe the place where you have lived? Did you share a room with other people? And the applicant answered that we have always been living as the two of us during our times together. Very rarely they actually refer to sexual relationships, but some of the applicants had also made some references to that. But here I took a citation from one of the interviews where she describes the actual interview situation. I cite, "We had that individual interview after the wedding, and they definitely grilled us on everything possible and impossible. I think there was a lot of doubt there, as if it wasn't a real relationship or something else. They asked absolutely everything they could, like which side of the bed did you sleep on last night? How old is your spouse's father? And what's his middle name?" And they asked some really absurd questions too. I felt like you had to prove yourself, and that maybe there was already this assumption that it wasn't real relationship or something. So while reading this, I was thinking what Audrey Macking also wrote, that does this committed relationship always need to be a sexually romantic relationship? And are they only like this kind of two different kind of relationships, one based on love and other based on different other interests? Actually, they tend to be more complex. And then I wanted to talk a bit about how people have felt receiving this or seeing these decisions. This is mostly based on the interview with Epi in her 20s, who very clearly states that there was kind of no sense of proportionality in the decisions, and she sees really like this clear exercise of authority in decision making. So there's this, on the other hand, there is right for the family life or protection of family life versus the threat to public order and security. And in her case, she was pregnant, but her partner's visa was denied despite that, because he had earned money in Finland without having the work permit. So I cite her here. Then I also experienced it as very questionable and as a strong use of authority. Since these decisions are always made on an individual basis, assessing whether a visa can be granted in that kind of situation, it felt to me like there was no sense of proportionality. They know that someone taught a few hours, her spouse is an artist and he gave some lessons and earned perhaps a couple of €100 illegally. And on the other hand, the fact that his spouse is pregnant is on the scale. So to me, it felt extremely unreasonable and caused a lot of stress. Having followed several visa processes like this, I think there's quite a lot of arbitrariness and also structural violence happening. People who are in a very secure financial position or social and economically stable don't face these kind of problems. And here she was referring actually to the mother of her spouse's mother who was living in Latin America, and they wanted to have her to visit Finland. But since she didn't have any like permanent job or contract, she was working in some kind of market. They really had troubles like convincing authorities that she's only coming for the visit and is actually returning after that. This is how the expert interviewed by Evelina also brought it up. It feels like the family itself matters less than the process. The clients are expected to understand that they must follow the process in the correct order. So here we can talk about doing the family in the right way. So there's it's important to master the right conventions of narration to present a right kind of story. And especially the experts who are counseling the couples, they say that too much emotionality is not encouraged. It's rather making the case weaker. But the couples are very puzzled in these kind of situations because for them the thing is really emotional, and the question they ask that how can others evaluate the validity of their experience or their relationship? And as Carver also has written, there's this attempt to prove the relationship as genuine through a narrative display. And Julia, who I cite here, they actually, their problem was that her husband didn't have a valid passport and he couldn't enter Finland because of that. Eventually, she even gave birth to their child before her husband could come. But they really prepared all the documents, and she told to me that we had a solid story. We didn't have any holes in the story. We included photos of us. We did everything. everything we could find just in case. So like I said, from Facebook, if we had something published together, everything that could prove that we are really a couple, we also offered to give statements of our friends. Or whatever you want, we will give it to you. So they really wanted to make sure that once he has the passport, then the case is like a solid, and they will receive the residence permit. And this kind of evidence that they provided without anyone asking, this is the same kind of evidence that they have sometimes asked from people to provide like screenshots from social media or like from their phone calls, how often did they call, how long did they talk, or tickets if they have met somewhere abroad. But the advice the experts gave was to focus on the facts and what is being asked. But then on the other hand, if you look at the questions they are asking, it's sometimes difficult to understand what is expected from the real family. And interesting example is this, how long you are supposed to date before you get married. Like it's usually asked in the application that how long did you see each other before you got married? And you kind of understand that they want to make sure that you actually know each other before you get married. But on the other hand, this case I have described here, then they asked the couple, you mentioned that you met in 2015 and returned to Finland in 2016. And why did you decide to get married only in 2020? And the applicant or the sponsor writes, when I returned to Finland in 2016, my spouse and I were still young, and we had only been dating for a short time. So marriage wasn't yet something we considered. Marriage had always been a very big step for both of us. We wanted to first calmly build our relationship and see how it would develop. But actually, in many cases, people they got married more quickly than they had planned because they wanted to make things easier. So they might tell that they only had this small like registration of the relationship and plan to have a bigger wedding party later on. But in this, when they have received like extra questions, they were often asked like, how many people attended your wedding? What did you wear for the wedding and things like that. This is also, Peppi made me think, she was describing the situation, I mean, that there is a difference, like who is capable of making a good persuasive application. And she's saying, I remember thinking a lot about how difficult it would have been if I weren't a Finnish-speaking, highly educated person who has navigated Finnish bureaucracy for whole life. How can anyone manage this if they don't know the Finnish system or speak the language? I handled everything because my spouse would never have been able to manage any of this. So this is usually like an extra burden for the Finnish citizen. They are usually taking care of the application process, and it also affects the relationship. It means it's somehow unbalanced when you know that your status in the country depends on your partner. And what I didn't think at the beginning, but it became evident through the interviews with the experts, that when people divorce, things can also get really complicated, and the Finnish citizens are not always helpful towards their former partners. Also, I must say that some of the people I interviewed, they were also thinking that if they would divorce or separate from their partner, they could continue their marriage so that the other one would not be deported. And what Peppi also mentioned, that she filed a complaint with the Chancellor of Justice about the actions of Ministry of Foreign Affairs regarding the suspension of visa and residence permit services during the COVID pandemic. And it took over 3 years to get a response. But the decision was that the ministry has neglected its duties and acted in violation of the constitution. But here also it's important to think about the time frame, like what use is it? How useful it is when it was 3 years ago when you were having the baby and you wanted to have your husband to attend that moment of your life. So during some of the interviews, I was thinking this, that people who had been themselves working with this kind of cases and people applying for residence permit, they knew somehow what to expect, and they speculated a lot how to make a solid case. So in a way, I think this knowledge they had, it increased the pain, so to say. And they also pointed out how this personal is political, and the fact that they have to reveal their personal and intimate lives to make a point, to make people see how complicated these things can be. And there were also a lot of fears related to, for example, social media posts or participation in demonstrations, or this fear of being somehow seen in suspicious contexts. And for example, in this one case where this spouse had given these lessons and received some kind of, not salary, but a couple hundred euros for this work, he was revealed through the post in social media. At least that's what they thought. So the next time they were applying for a visa for him, they deleted all this kind of material that could possibly be used against them. And what Pia mentioned in her interview is the thing that even the worst part is over, and she doesn't need to constantly look over her shoulders while walking at the streets. They had this case of threat of deportation before they were married. So even the case is not active, and I think she's being a bit sarcastic about this interviews, mentioning that what if they look at the interviews again and see that one of us said she likes spaghetti and others said pasta, and maybe that's not okay. So what her point is that it doesn't really go away. And for years, their lives were just about the residence permit and nothing else. And I wanted to finish with this one applicant's response to this additional information request. They asked, did you lead a family life together? And the answer was, I don't know how family life is defined, so I can't answer the question about leading a family life. And I think it wraps up quite nicely what this is really about. Like, you are supposed to prove you are leading a family life together, but how to define what is acceptable family life. So could it be that the state officials are not actually equipped to discern the authenticity of relationships, and instead they evaluate the performance of the authenticity against the script composed of highly stylized, ritualized codes of behavior? Thank you.
Come up here. Oh, and meanwhile, I forgot. Pihla has very kindly brought along one of her books. So if anybody wants to have a look at that as well, shall we have a sit so that we can? Sorry.
Stop sharing.
Yes. Oh, Lynn's going downstairs. Yeah. If you stop sharing, then we can see online as well. And let's see. Thank you. So we'll have to keep an eye on the questions. Great. Okay. So thank you ever so much. I mean, that was striking for me because I wonder if we can pin ourselves to the screen. It probably doesn't matter that much. Can we now pin ourselves to the screen? That we can
I think you're out
go on
of
to
focus if you move closer to.
Oh, right. So if I come on this side, then I'm at the right.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, I'll come that side. Thanks, Sam. Great. Thank you. I mean, that for me was fascinating. There was so much that that resonates with things that we've got in all of our research. I'm sure Helena was also having these things. But we've also got people in the room and online for whom this isn't their field. So I'm imagining we'll have rather different kinds of questions. So how about I get out of the way to start with and see what questions there are. In the chat, if you'd like to ask a question in the online Zoom room, please could you type it into the chat or raise your hand and we'll come to you, if that would be okay. Is everybody still hearing us in the Zoom room? If anybody could put a thumbs up or anything into the chat, then that would be great. Thank you. Rather weird having everybody disembodied. So there's a couple of thumbs up. Excellent. So I mean, I've got that I could ask about, but I think I'll go to the room first and see who wants to get us started. John.
Yeah, thanks, Pihla. That was really interesting. I just had a question. So what you're focusing on here were the people who are having difficulties and challenges and sometimes having their applications rejected. And the skepticism, at one point you said, I wrote it down here, that the kind of stance of immigration officials was to view applications with wariness and to be skeptical of the validity of their claims or of the truthfulness of their relationship or something along those lines. And your data supported that, but the quantitative data showed that. I mean, you presented a number of figures, but there was one slide that showed the different countries, and just a quick scan of that looked like it was about 3% rejection for, I don't know if that was for 1 year or for a number of years or something. And another point you said it went up as high as 17% in some years or something. So I wasn't quite sure about the actual numbers, but clearly a lot of these things are getting through. So I just wondered so you've got, I mean, obviously your research is not on the side of the immigration officials who are doing this, but they take a skeptical stance, critical stance, yet they are approving most applications. And I just wondered, is that something that you find? I'm trying to look through the book here right now, but just seeing the range of cases and stuff. And so is this something you would find in other contexts? I mean, Catherine and Helena can probably speak to the UK context in terms of the rejection rate. So yeah, it seems to me there seems to be a slight tension there, at least between the 3%. 70% is obviously a much higher number, and I don't mean to take away from anything from that 3% of the people who are rejected, but the stance is that they're critical, yet they're passing them. So how do you reconcile that kind of tension?
Yeah, thank you. Yes, indeed, the last year the percentage was smaller for those decisions, negative decisions. It was only approximately 3, and it's interesting to look at the reasons for that. I don't know the answers yet, but Jana is going to interview also the officials of the Finnish Immigration Service, so that will be interesting. Like, did they change some practices or what? But I think it doesn't actually change the experience. If I think about the people who I have interviewed, who have eventually received a positive decision, but when they describe the process and the interviews and everything they have gone through, actually, from the point of view of their experience, it's still this like uncertainty and like how long it's going to take, whether we are going to be accepted, and we have to go through this again. And what if we divorce? Because there are cases when the couple have divorced, and even if they have children, the partner is deported because they say that it's enough to have one parent in Finland and the other one can attend through Skype or Zoom or whatever. So I agree that there is, I mean, if you compare to other couples where both are non-citizens, it's more easier for this kind of couples, but yes, from the experiential perspective, it's.
And do you know if the applicants know about the acceptance rates, the 3%, or the rejection rates, the 3% or the 5% or whatever it is? I mean, are they aware of that, or is that just unknown to them?
So do they think there's a big chance they're going to get rejected, or do they know that it's actually quite likely they'll get through?
I haven't actually asked whether they have looked at the statistics. They mostly rely on experiences from their like friends or acquaintances, or also like, I mean, most likely if they go to seek help from the experts, then they will be notified, like what is the. But I remember also one expert I interviewed, she said that she knows one couple that meant to submit the application, and when they left the building and they were on the parking lot, they already received a positive decision. And she said that don't talk about this to others because this is really exceptional that you get it so quickly.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just thinking when I applied to naturalize here, and you know, I had no idea what the numbers were, but I was really nervous about whether I would be accepted, and you know, I'm sure my chances were very high. But it's the not knowing, or maybe even knowing some of the anecdotes, but not knowing, you know, even if you know them. So yeah, I mean, it just feeds into that what you're saying. It's not the reality of it; it's the perception of it, and the perception is one of uncertainty, precarity, anxiety.
Yeah, we've got a comment from Nicole in the in the chat. It says, just to say that in the UK, the success rate depends on country of origin, but is mostly over 90%. But at least in our interviews, it's very much of the experience of having to go through this process, especially for citizens who are often completely shocked by the system and process. So I think that's also what you're saying, because, well, in the UK, however, there are such barriers to being able to just apply. It's so expensive, and there's the income requirement is so high that the effective kind of the people who can't apply, once you, if they did apply, the rejection rate would be huge. But yes, even for those for whom it's fairly straightforward, it's interesting, and it sounds like it's a kind of gentler in some ways system in Finland than in the UK, but it's still that business of having your relationship and your imagined future together contingent on a decision of a representative of the state is somehow fundamentally fundamental insecurity. I was interested also what you said about people who'd already had that experience of immigration insecurity, kind of, because we find people are really shocked when they come to it for the first time, citizens, but you were saying that it sort of makes it worse if you had already had that experience of knowing how difficult it was and the insecurity before.
Yeah, I think both ways of that.
Yeah.
Because for some people, it really came as a surprise that they might made some kind of decisions, for example, living separately because one of them got a job from the other city and one stayed with the kids on the other city where they went to school, and later on they like were in trouble because they lived in different cities and they never thought it would mean anything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's a really nice example. I think it's you first. Sorry,
Natalie. Two things I was interested in. One is when you were interviewing Finnish citizens, were any of them naturalized as Finnish? And if so, did that make a difference of how much suspicion fell on the relationship? And then the other thing, I was really interested in this idea of like having to prove that you're motivated by love, like rather than, it's a sort of pretense, isn't it? Because, or maybe I'm being really unromantic, but I think all relationships involve some kind of transaction. And often when there's a visa involved, my own marriage included, that can be a huge part of that transaction, but also about maintaining that love. So I was also really interested in that idea of power, how it shifts the power, because if you sort of get divorced before a certain amount of time, then you're still, you know, potentially deported. And I was sort of wondering if any of the interviewees sort of reflected on how the process actually changed their relationships, rather than it just being a sort of matter of proving things, if that makes sense.
Thank you. Among the people I interviewed, there were no naturalized citizens, but I think Evelina interviewed one couple where this was the case. And when I looked at the decisions made by Finnish Immigration Service, there was, in some cases, the sponsor had received Finnish citizenship some years before the application. And I want to look at that more carefully. I want to check also the statistics, but from the first like quick reading, I could see that these among these people who received negative decision, these in these cases they were more often interviewed. Actually, many of the other applicants were not interviewed last year from these who received negative decisions, but those who had themselves received Finnish citizenship lately, they were interviewed. In this material, we also have like summaries or transcriptions of the interviews, and in some cases it was like 3 hours interview. So it's like 100 questions you are getting.
that's, I mean, yeah, having actual very detailed applications and the transcripts of the interviews and the decision letters. I think this is really interesting stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think
There's
we're.
a question from Nicole too, but
Yeah.
no, just so you know, she.
I'll go to Sam next,
Yeah.
then Nicole, then you, Helena, if that's all right.
Thanks. I was just curious about so how the authorities deal with unmarried partner applications, right? Because I think with married partners, the threshold on things like you have to show genuine love and some form of existing relationship can be applied. As I understand it, in relation to what they call like social relationship or unmarried partner relationships, those kinds of tests may not be as firm as in the case of married married people. I'm just wondering whether your data has any information on whether there's a difference between how the authorities treat married couples versus those who are applying on the basis of wanting to live together and eventually get married. We have the same things about not trusting them and so on, applying the same way, or whether they move the goalposts in different ways there.
Okay, thank you. I'm not sure if you mean what did you mean, but there's, I mean, you don't have to be married to apply based on a family tie. It's
Yeah.
but if you are not married, then you have to show that you have lived together or led family life for 2 years, and so then you have to show like documents that you have rented apartment together, or when did the person arrive, and for example, when I looked at the last year's these decisions, in many cases pandemics had made it very complicated, because then you cannot actually, there were restrictions where you can travel and where you can stay, and complicated situations related to that. And what also can make things complicated if one of the partners had been married before, and then they count this cohabitation only starting from the official divorce. So there are these kinds of arguments. Definitely, it's easier for people who are married and who have a child. So then it's easier for those people to show that it's really like a real marriage. And I forgot to answer yours. Another part of your question. I think the people who we have interviewed or discussed with, they don't actually question themselves this love marriage. I think they also like stick to this, that we are in love and this is like a real partnership in that sense.
I can recommend, Natalie, the first on the reference list, which is Apostolos Andrikopoulos' work on love, money and papers, and he was working with West African irregular migrants in the Netherlands and Eastern European women in relationships, doing amazing ethnographic work, very fine-grained, about how they see the exchanges in their relationships. Really interesting, but I can imagine if you're doing work on how you present your relationship to the authorities, then it's going to be a different kind of narrative. Yeah, really interesting. Oh, there's a practical question in the chat from Nicole. How much is the application? What is the fee for the visa application in Finland? And how long is the resident permit valid? Are there further costs if the permit is renewed? So about the costs of the costs of the process, which in research in the UK, those loom very large in people's experience, but.
Yeah, I must say, actually, I don't remember how much is the fee. I think it's not comparable to what it is in the UK. But first, when they first apply, they get a residence permit for 1 year, and then they have to renew it, and then it's 4 years, if I remember correctly. And these ones I have analyzed, they are the first applications. Yeah.
Helena once wrote a paper called Family Resemblances, which is about the similarities between all these different visa regimes, because you know that total of 5 years, the 2 years of proving you're a couple, it's like they all copy each other's homework in Europe. Yeah.
And what actually they are really worried about, and what they have discussed in the interviews, is that the regulations are changing very, very quickly. And so especially the current government, there are many, for example, regarding the citizenship, the period is, it used to be, I think, 5 years, and now it's going to be 7 years. And so they have to like all the time check what changes are coming and how will they affect our family, and that's very stressful.
Helen, I think you were next in the queue.
Thank you. That was really interesting, and really, no, I took lots of notes and lots of things that I wanted to talk about, and lots of things I want to ask. So I'm going to try and just ask one question, but kind of bringing in some of these things, which I think is around what you said at the end, and what I think Anne-Marie does. What she said about it being a performance, which I think is absolutely true, that it's all about sort of the applicant thinking about a show, or the decision maker, and the decision maker accepting that show is sufficiently convincing. And and I think it's always going to be like that, just because nobody can see into anyone else's heart anyway. And I mean, sort of, what does it all mean? It's very, what can you know? But it always, the thing that really I keep wondering about, and I wonder whether it was borne out by the data that you're getting, is kind of what's it all for. So if we know that we can't really tell how sincere a relationship is, but we have to kind of get a kind of facsimile up, and if that's a kind of mutual understanding between the decision maker, and I think it is, because when I observed interviews, I saw very much that decision makers were sort of almost hoping that the applicant would answer in a certain way in order to justify the sort of decision they wanted to give. And I wondered, what are they trying to do with these interviews? Is it just that they say they have to tick this box so they can say to the public, oh yes, we really control for sham marriages, don't you worry, you're all safe from that, we do detect them? Or is it part of a wider gatekeeping function? And the reason I asked that is I wondered if you looked at, I noticed that in the data you gave us, there were quite a lot of differentiations between who was refused in terms of nationality. I wondered if there were differentiations in who was refused in terms of gender. And also I did wonder, and in particular, because I think you said all your interviewees were women. I couldn't remember exactly where they came from, but how it came out that you were only interviewing Finnish citizen women at the beginning.
The call has been open, but I haven't reached that kind of couples where the man would be like Finnish citizen and the spouse.
I see. So that's all that you've come up with. So that is,
yeah.
But I just wondered whether, in fact, if you looked at all the kind of refusals for lack of a genuine relationship and sort of took out all the kind of, stuff around emotion and commitment and whether you share a bed and all that, and just looked at who is refused, what nationalities are refused, or what type of socioeconomic classes are refused, whether there would be a discernible pattern there.
Yeah, I think we are trying to do that, but we haven't gotten there yet.
Yeah.
And it's a bit complicated also because there are many reasons intertwined. They usually, we have this Excel which says that where the applicant is from, and the main reason of refusal. But usually there are when you look at the decisions, there are many reasons, and maybe they just choose for the main reason the most clearest reason that cannot be appealed. So I think, but I'm not sure yet. I'll have to look at this. That why there are no sham marriages in the last year's material. It could be that they have just decided that that would not be the first statistical reason that they put on the decisions.
That makes sense actually, because I think in the British context, since we've had such a high income threshold, the discussion around sham marriages really kind of has become much more of a paper exercise and much less focus on it. So I do think there is a sort of we want to have a selection process. What are the things that we're going to sort of latch onto to try and make that selection process?
There's also a sort of contagion sometimes across Europe. So when Denmark started really focusing on integration as the thing that should be used as a reason for restricting family migration. Britain a few years later followed suit and stopped stressing the sham marriage bit so much, and maybe sham marriage is just out of fashion in Europe at the moment as the justification for restrictions.
Yeah, and I mean, it's so difficult to judge.
Yeah.
Isn't it? Yeah.
But it did also look as if the peak for refusals was around the time of the pandemic, and you said that there were particular issues around the pandemic as well. That might be interesting.
Yeah, it could be also related to this migration crisis of 2015 and 16, and the fact that people who then came as asylum seekers, they later applied based on family ties, and that is something that they often get rejected. And there's also, like, mostly, like I mentioned, these are like young men and they are married then to Finnish women. So there is a connection there, but we have to look more carefully about
And
these statistics.
I think your Iraq and Somalia had the highest refusal rate.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think last year in these Somali cases, it was mostly that kind of couples that one of them was a naturalized citizen and the other one was then applying based on family tie. In the case of Somalis, I think there were, yeah.
Can I just ask a sort of clarification point? Are all of the couples that you've been all the couples you've been interviewing or represented in the refusals, are they all heterosexual cisgender couples?
The couples I have interviewed, they are heterosexual. And as I shortly mentioned, it's really difficult to, if I look at this Finnish immigration service case material there, it's kind of, the gender is kind of hidden.
Well, that's interesting.
Yeah, yeah. So you cannot really, they only talk about the applicant and the sponsor.
Really?
And then if the documents are in English, then you can see whether it's she or he.
Right.
I mean, in Finnish language, you cannot really differentiate because it's only like and it's the same for female and male. So in Finnish language documents, it's really difficult to say.
I think in the UK that you can, all the immigration data is split into husband and wife.
And a big difference, and it's been quite significant historically that husbands are much more likely to be refused than wives.
Yeah.
Suspicion very gendered as well as racialized. Yeah. I had a question about the not showing too much emotion. I thought there was a fascinating bit there that I'd really like to hear more about that you've got. So you're suggesting that there's an idea that there should be a sexual romantic love there. They should be sharing beds. They should be whatever, but they're being advised by the people who work with them not to show too much emotion. And so what is that? I mean, I'm thinking of Anne-Marie Daust's work on technologies of love, and there's obviously quite a sort of delicate technology here to show love in some ways, but not too much. And why is that? Is that because it's suspicious or because it's irrelevant and they want practical demonstrations of love, or what is going on there?
Yeah, I think it's the last one. They want practical demonstration of love. They don't want to hear too much. But sometimes there is this discrepancy that people who are writing about their intimate lives, they really put their emotional descriptions of how they met and how the relationship developed. And I kind of imagine that the officials who are reading these documents, they are like confused what to do with this kind of material.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes they have provided 5-10 pages of like descriptions of the relationship, and it can be hard to like go through all these documents to see like whether what is relevant and what is not. I mean, yeah.
Also because I guess the more you actually try to convince them of the genuineness of things, of course you have to. your emotions and everything, the less likely they are to believe you. It seems
Too much.
it's too much, yeah.
So really too much. They
Yeah.
want,
It's quite paradoxical.
they want measurable, concrete
I mean, I do think
manifestation.
what you say about they can't cope with it all, because, you know, if you're a decision maker and you've got like 20 million, you're going to be expected to get through so many files a day or a week. And, you know, if somebody's sending you a 30-page kind of thing, you know, it's free to read, you know. And in fact, the British way now is they're very practical. I mean, they want things like, I mean, I don't quite know how you're meant to do them if you're living in separate countries. So, but they say things like the best thing would be, you know, like a joint bank account or a joint tenancy agreement. Yeah. Or something that is a kind of really physical, immediate, practical thing. And they're not really interested in your emotion. And that is one of the things I think, you know, talking about this whole debate about technology of emotion, because I think it is really interesting, because there's sort of feeling, oh, you know, if only we can persuade them that we really love each other. Actually, they're really not interested in that. And that was that thing about where, you know, he'd given like 2 hours of art lessons or something, and you know, they're not, you know, if there's a reason why you don't want to food, however much you love each other, it's just not material, it's not of interest to them, you know. It is, and it is a really interesting, you know, it is a technology, but what exactly is a technology for? I don't know, in a way. Yeah.
I mean, in the UK case, it's so clear that the state is trying to filter out, you know, there's the desire to manage migration, to select the brightest and best.
Yes.
And the idea that individual citizens would be able to select somebody rather than the state, it seems so clear that the whole system is set up to try to filter out those who are not considered the most desirable migrants.
Absolutely explicit. Just sorry, I know John's trying to come in, but absolutely explicit in the case of the latest MIR when they tried to put it to the skilled worker level.
Yeah, yes, they randomly said, okay, well, let's get spouses. The people sponsoring spouses will have to earn as much as a skilled worker would have to do to get a visa, which is just random.
Yeah.
But yeah. John, did you have another?
Yeah, just a really obvious question. I think you probably answered, but I missed it, which is, what's a successful outcome? Is that residency or naturalization or something different?
For the applicants,
Yeah,
they first receive a residence permit, and after 7 to 10 years, they are
eligible to naturalize. And so so is this outside of the normal kind of naturalization and residency procedures? And so my question here is, from an integration perspective, you know, the trends throughout Europe for the past 20 years have been called various things, civic integration, but you know, it's generally showing some level of acculturation, you know, awareness of the cultural norms, the expectations, and these sorts of things. And is this trajectory to both residency and ultimately citizenship, is it one that exists completely outside of that integration trajectory, which presumably exists for other applicants in Finland? Because it seems anomalous. It just seems that, you know, with all the emphasis on shared value, or I don't know, I mean, I can't speak for every country, but a lot of things, you know, shared values, we talk about fundamental British values in the UK, we have a life in the UK test, we have all these kinds of things that are kind of showing an awareness for, an appreciation for, a move toward the kind of cultural norms and values of the country that you're moving into. And here it's a dyad, it's a relationship, it's, you know, it's two people, and the validity, so it's a very different logic to naturalization than, which is just interesting, if when the dominant one is all about, you need to become like us. So I'm just wondering if, I mean, you know, it's never presented in that way, but in fact, it usually is some version of that. But I'm just wondering if that integration kind of ethos informs this process as well, or whether it's independent of it, because what you're presenting is really about the relationship. It may, you know, ensuring that it's not a sham marriage or something. Yeah.
I mean, some of the applicants, they have written about this, that the partner is already either integrated or knows the language, or it is going to be integrated. But I think from the point of view of these applications and the evaluation, this is irrelevant, because it's not required.
Yeah.
But later on, they will also go through this integration programs and language courses, and I think it depends more on the background of the applicant, like where he's or she's from. Like, of course, if yeah, depends whether from which country they come from, like how difficult it is.
So would a normal applicant, an applicant for naturalization outside of the marriage version, would that person have to do language courses in Finnish? Would they have to satisfy a language requirement?
If I remember correctly, if you let me think. If you have a working permit, then you don't need a language course. And asylum seekers also, I mean, there's no requirement that you have to know the language before you come. So
Before you come, but as a you know, pathway to naturalization, I just wonder if it's, my more general question is, are there special requirements, are there different requirements for marriage applicants from other applicants?
no, I think not at this stage. And then when you apply for citizenship, it's like there's no difference whether you
Married or not?
Yeah. When you apply citizenship, then you have this requirement of B level.
Yeah, okay.
Language. Yeah.
I was thinking about your integration, bringing integration into it, and the groups who have, the nationality groups who have higher rejection rates, and you made the distinction between Iraqis who tended to be marrying ethnic Finns, and the Somalis who tend to be marrying naturalized people from Somalia. And I was thinking about that, how because of once a population is defined as somehow problematic, whether in integration terms or something else, then the reason for it being problematic or the reason for rejection may be just to fulfill that. So if you're in the UK, I keep going back to the UK example, but in the UK, there's these strong discourses about if you're marrying within the ethnic group and bringing in somebody from an ancestral country of origin, that's an integration problem. That A, shows you're not integrated because you should be marrying somebody here, and B, is going to continue lack of integration in your group. But then if you are from a previously problematized population and you marry somebody, intermarriage is no longer, ethnic intermarriage is no longer a marker of integration, it's a marker of your lack of trustworthiness, because you're obviously just using this for a passport. And so the reasons, it's interesting that you give a reason, but I think you're very right to sort of be suspicious about why a particular reason gets given for a particular case, but I think it could be really interesting to look at how they're patterned. Yeah,
I think it would be really, I mean, I think that would be really interesting if you can get some of that data.
Yeah.
It would be really interesting.
Yeah.
so we're slightly running out of time, but we have got time
I
for
just wanted to
another.
make a last comment on that actually, which is, I think what's not in the mix yet is the sort of marriage practices themselves. So, you know, it's very, for example, arranged marriage. You know, presumably arranged marriage does not fit very well into those interviews of trying to prove love and trying to prove that you've been together. And that I wonder if that maybe sometimes comes into the sort of ethnic disparities as well.
Yeah, it is the question related to these marriages that were registered outside Finland. Then there is the question of validity of the marriage, and yeah, there were cases like that.
Sorry to bring in the UK again, but another contrast with the UK, because the UK system has been dealing with arranged marriages for such a long time, they're not actually necessarily problematized so much, are they?
No, but there were. I mean, there was a whole rule in the sort of 70s and the 80s. It was dedicated to essentially refusing people on the basis of being in an arranged marriage. And that then was taken out in 1997 and has never reappeared. And I think the external manifestations of a common life, I mean, it's much more about, you know, do you live together? You know, are you, rather than your motivations, which is, you know, if after all, if that's what you're asking to do, then there is some logic, there is some connection between what they're asking about and what you're asking for, you know. So, you know, the emotion or the feelings or the reasons don't really matter.
Thank you very, very much. So we have got drinks. Linda's put out some drinks